Good morning. Welcome and thank you for being with us today. I am Rasha Helwa and I'm the director of the Atlantic Council's Empower Me initiative. At Empower Me, we are working to shape solutions to empower entrepreneurs, women, and the private sector, and building coalitions of public and private partnerships to drive regional economic integration, prosperity, and job creation. We are honored to be hosting this event today to discuss the impact that laws and regulations have on women entrepreneurs and women's economic empowerment more broadly. This discussion is part of our new WIN, Women Innovators Fellowship, which we lead in cooperation with Georgetown University's McDonough School of Business, thanks to the generous support of US Embassy Riyadh, PepsiCo, and UPS. The WIN Fellowship supports more than 30 Saudi women entrepreneurs to build leadership and executive capacity to scale their businesses and improve access to local and global markets. This is the second workshop we have hosted since the start of the program in March 2022, and we're very much looking forward to engaging with all the participants and attendees today in person and virtually. If you are joining today's discussion virtually via Zoom, please feel free to submit your questions to the panelists through the Q&A feature on Zoom application. For our in-person participants in Riyadh, please raise your hand and Jamila will give you the floor to ask questions. And now, before I turn the floor over to our wonderful moderator today, Jamie Stainsbury, let me introduce her and our distinguished speakers to you all. Jamie Stainsbury is an associate vice president with the Cohen Group and leads its Middle East practice, providing strategic advice and practical insights to businesses on opportunities in the region. Jamie recently moved back to the United States after leading the AmCham work in Saudi Arabia for several years as executive director. And as for our panel, Afnan Ababtain is the director of women entrepreneurship at Saudi Arabia's Small and Medium Enterprises General Authority, Munsha'at, where she has developed a national strategy to grow and enable women entrepreneurs through programs and initiatives such as Women Accelerator and the National Network for Women in Business. Imad Abdul Qadir is the Albright Stonebridge Group Gulf Cooperation Council Regional Manager, where he advises clients of the firm's Middle East and North Africa practice on policy and business trends in the region, and he also leads the firm's GCC office. Yara Al-Zuman heads the legal department at PepsiCo in Saudi Arabia, where she champions diversity, equity, and inclusion. Afnan, Imad, and Yara, thank you all for being with us today. And now, Jamie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Rasha, for that warm introduction. And it is an honor to be back with you all today, to be able to serve in the role as moderator on this side of the Atlantic. Today, as you all know, we're here to discuss the regulations and legal structures that impact women in business in Saudi Arabia. And before we kick things off with our esteemed panelists, I just wanted to share on a personal level that having worked in the region for 12 years, I still remember, like many of you do, what it was like to be the only woman in a boardroom during office meetings with officials in the private sector, and what a shift that is from when I left just a few months ago, where I've been in offices with open floor plans and where in places like the Ministry of Culture, there are more women working than men. So clearly there have been significant reforms, and I'm just extremely interested to hear more from you, our panelists, as well as the WIN Fellows and public guests today on how these changes are impacting the environment for working women and entrepreneurs. As many do know, Saudi Arabia enacted significant civil and labor reforms that came into practice in August 2019, and that really helped drive the increase in women's participation in the labor force. And then more recently, in March 2022, the king issued a new royal decree, which was the first legal instrument to regulate family matters in the kingdom, and also had direct implications for women's full participation. And so what I'd like to do with this background is just kick things off with our panelists and invite Imad Abdul Qadir to give us a brief overview of how those changes in Saudi Arabia are impacting the increased participation that we're seeing today. Over to you, Imad. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Jamie, and many thanks to the Women in Business Group and the AmCham Riyadh and to the Atlantic Council. I'm delighted to be in this conversation. So before I start about the regulations that changed, it's important to put things in context and remember that Saudi Arabia is going through a deep change of almost everything. And the transformation is not only regulatory, it is a combination of many things that are happening to make this transformation possible. The changes that we're seeing for women is part of a huge transformation of 5 main things that are changing in the country at the same time. We are seeing these deep social changes. We are the total redesign of the regulatory system, the significant restructuring of government and digital transformation and eliminating the bureaucracies, restructuring of the economy and including new sectors and moving away from war. At the same time, the pursuit of these extremely ambitious game-changing projects. Each one of these tasks is a very challenging task on its own. And all of this is happening at the same time. We need to put that in mind because it's not like we are, because we're diving into this in this discussion, this is not happening in isolation in Saudi Arabia. So I thought that was important to know. I'm going to go through what I chose as the 6 main developments in the regulatory developments that affected women, and a little bit about the context. So, but let me start with the end and say that the most important regulation that changed happened in July 2019, when they went through a number of different laws and regulations, line by line, and struck out anywhere that says that a woman needs somebody's permission to do anything. So the guardianship went out, women gained equal rights to travel and to work and to conduct civil affairs, just like any other citizen anywhere in the world. Women gained effectively administrative independence. But I would like to go back a little bit in history and say that for decades, the government in Saudi Arabia has been investing in the education of women, higher education, best universities in the world, and locally. But also for decades, women's employment was sort of limited into healthcare and education of girls. And then there were a lot of efforts. Many of these efforts did not give the desired results. Some of them, for example, in the 2000s, when the Nitaqat program was introduced, at one point they said that if you hire a Saudi woman, that each Saudi woman would count for 2 Saudi men in the ratio that you need to gain for hiring locals to be allowed to get foreigners to come. That did not work very well because hiring women for any company was difficult, and the whole hiring of Saudis in general did not succeed a lot, or not enough. And hiring women was a little bit difficult because there were mobility issues, there was segregation norms and social norms that were a factor, and all sorts of other complications. So the only exception where women did succeed, and men, Saudi men and women, so Saudization in general, including men, including women, was in the banking sector. And that's because the regulator of that sector decided that Saudis are going to be employed, and that the banking sector had a number of years to make that happen. But when in 2016, Saudi Arabia started on its journey to go through this deep transformation, deep change of everything, one of the first things that happened was the removal of the authorities of the Commission of Promotion of Virtue and Prevention of Vice. This helped prepare female mobility, independence, and equality in work. Because this organization was effectively a law enforcement organization that was enforcing a strict interpretation of a social moral code that was not written anywhere. And it was difficult to know what was allowed and what wasn't, and there was a lot of ambiguity. So one of the first things that happened was the removal of the authority of this organization. And then we all heard about the 2017 announcement that women are going to thrive in 6 months. In those 6 months, a sexual harassment law came out. Very shortly, that was followed by the Ministry of Labor issuing a charter of sexual harassment in the workplace document, which was an internal document for the ministry, but it was published as a model for other ministries to follow and other companies to follow. And then the changes that I spoke about at the beginning happened, and women gained all of the independence. Today, I do not know of any laws or regulations that sort of discriminate between men and women in business or in the workplace. And the most recent development that may not be directly aimed at business, but it is impacting women's life, is the civil status law that came out. That law codifies things like marriage, divorce, child custody, and so on. And that is one of the 4 laws that will totally restructure the legal system in Saudi Arabia. So these are the legal changes that happened. Accompanying these legal changes were plenty of programs and initiatives and that are aimed to support women and help them excel in business and in workplace. We are now 6 years since the start of this journey. In those 6 years, a lot of success has happened. A lot of social acceptance is evident, but we still have a long way to go. With that, let me hand it back to you, Jane.
Thank you so much, Ahmad, and really appreciate both the context that you set this in and the sweeping other reforms that were happening at the same time that made it possible. Obviously, the country's been getting recognition for this. The Brookings Institute recently published its observations on the rise of Saudi women's participation in the workforce. And just like you just described, that along with these policy changes, there are usually education and structural economic changes that can increase the women's participation. So I agree with you that in the case of Saudi, we know women's education levels have been historically high, and with all due respect, often higher than that of men. So that's clearly a win for women. But I wonder if you could also speak to the structural economic changes that the country is experiencing today with a continued push towards diversifying away from oil, dependence on expatriate labor. How are those other structural changes impacting female labor participation now, and how do you predict that might impact it in the future?
Well, the fact that Saudi Arabia is opening up totally new sectors of the economy that were not available for employment in the past, with a clear mindset that this is going to be a source of employment. That includes, for example, tourism, entertainment, cultural, and archaeological work. That opens the door swinging for new sectors where women joining the workplace are not displacing men in the workplace. And women and men both have new options where mobility in the workplace is high. So a lot of people will need to flow to these new sectors. A lot of positions in the traditional sectors will be available for new joiners of the market, both men and women. So that is what I mean by all of these changes need to happen at the same time and need to succeed together so that each one of them builds on the other. There's synergy between them. So in terms of, I don't want to dive too much into what exact economic sectors are being targeted, but I do think that there's a lot of synergies between the fact that we're opening up new sectors, new developments, new giga projects, creating the opportunity for new jobs. Maybe a lot of those jobs are not there yet, but they are coming soon.
Thank you. No, that's great. And it is exciting to think of what those new opportunities can mean for women and men as the labor market expands and new opportunities are there. I think my final question to you before turning to some of our other panelists today is specifically related to what a lot of the women in the room on this call are doing, and that's entrepreneurship. One of the key indicators for measuring women's economic empowerment is the ability to build credit and own property. Those directly relate to being able to fund and launch ventures. And I'm wondering if you can speak to any of the changes in the laws that have to do with that. Essentially, do men and women have the same access to credit in Saudi Arabia?
Well, yeah, I'm sure Afnan has a lot more to say about this later, but I am not aware of any differences in access to credit. I think everything that's what is happening to encourage entrepreneurship in general, both for men and women, is amazing. It's fantastic, and I can see it for myself. My own daughter has embarked on an entrepreneurship journey, and she has been extremely successful.
Fantastic.
And I know of many young men and women who decided that they will attempt their fate at making their own things, and they have been rewarded very nicely. So the short answer is there are no differences in access to funding between men and women, as far as I know.
Thank you. Yes, and I do look forward to hearing from Afnan on your perspective there too, and the efforts that you've done to do them. Before we do that, I'd like to turn the conversation over to Yara, General Counsel of Saudi Arabia at PepsiCo, and to look more closely at how these regulations and changes that Ahmad just described for us, how they were actually implemented in the private sector. I know you've been both involved in labor law and HR systems through that entire transformation process, and would just love to hear what it was like to start implementing those changes, how you educated your employees, male and female, on what those reforms meant for the workplace.
Hi, Jamie. I just want to start by adding to what you previously said, thinking about the situation when I first started my career in 2010, and then seeing how everything is right now. It's extremely surreal. I can't even believe it. It's like I don't know, it's a cultural shock while I'm living it day to day. So alhamdulillah, it's all going into the right direction. On the reforms that happened, I think I've worked in the public sector and I'm working in the private sector. In both instances, when we talk about the guardianship law, it wasn't as detailed as people perceive of it. So when you review the actual text of the law, there are limited instances where it's actually required, a guardian approval is required, but it's been widely implemented by the people here in Saudi, even when it wasn't required. So let's say a woman working in Saudi, if I haven't been able, I tried hard to find something concrete to base people saying no to women on an actual law or a religious text, but I haven't been able to. Even when I taught a course in Princess Noura University, it was actually one of the things that I requested from my students, like find actual basis for guardianship, whether in the law or in the Quran. And they couldn't. Some were blindly convinced that it exists, it should happen, but then when they researched it, it was like, teacher, we couldn't find anything that proves it. So when we're talking about the guardianship, when I first started my career in the public sector, there were a couple of instances where, and one time a female associate's husband requested from the HR director that he terminates her employment. Yeah. And another instance where a father of also an associate requested they terminate her employment. Each instance was handled differently between the person that was handling the issue, both HR directors. So when the father asked for them to terminate his daughter's employment, the HR director at the time opted to distract him from the issue. So she's not here. We don't know where she's employed. She's not even coming to work, making excuses for her until he lost hope that he would actually do something about it. The HR director after him, when that person's husband asked them to terminate her employment, he outright said, no, it's not your business. It's her employment journey. It's her decision. If she wants to remain, I'm going to make her remain. Both of these situations happened before the lifting of the guardianship law, the cancellation of the guardianship law. So this just gives an insight. It's left to the people to apply it. It's not that specific. Okay, it was a requirement for traveling. It was a requirement for issuing a passport, but it didn't really have substance in everything else, whether opening a bank account, and so on, what is perceived by the people inside Saudi and outside Saudi as a requirement. So when we talk about implementing reforms, it wasn't really hard. It happened. The only thing that I say we did internally is that when the ministry, so we used to have, our offices weren't segregated. We had a separate office space for females who felt more comfortable working there, but whoever wanted to stay in a non-segregated office had the option to. So previously, when we had someone visit us from the Ministry of Labor, and we had to run around to the female section to avoid getting penalized. But now, alhamdulillah, they look around, how's everything? Everything is good, and they leave.
Thank you, Yara. No, that's wonderful, and I love the firsthand stories of how that impacted real individuals that you were able to interact with there. And I'm curious too, as you've been there, for so long and seen these recent changes too, were there any formal programs that were helpful within PepsiCo, or things that you helped either some of your colleagues or those that were working there to get used to some of these new changes? Just curious about that.
So diversity is huge on PepsiCo's agenda, and we've been implementing it even before the reforms that happen in Saudi. We champion diversity. We had it as targets to employ women in executive positions and work on their career. We have lines in our plants fully operated by women. So we're working on it. I think what we worked on when the reforms happened is changing the culture. So we're a Saudi company. We're proudly employing many Saudi employees. So when we had difficulties in them adjusting to the reforms, we tried to implement programs. We tried to get them to champion diversity. We tried to talk about it as much as we can, so it would be the new norm for them, rather than being adverse to it. Or so I've suffered from it a little bit, especially with the older generation. When I first joined PepsiCo, there were an older generation of male employees that had struggled with the notion that I might ask them or demand that they do certain work for me, and they tried to resist it for a while. But then again, with the social reforms happening and the laws changing, they had to accept it eventually.
Oh, that's wonderful. And we've seen that, I think, as well as on the ground there in Riyadh through different mentorship programs and the types of initiatives happening that just help normalize it for everyone, what it means to help advance and promote women and men in their careers. I'm curious too, just around some of these, additional incentives for parents that work, again, including men and women, when it comes to things like parental leave and childcare subsidies. If you could speak to a little bit about what that looks like in Saudi, perhaps it may even be different in your corporate setting, and if there's anything as you sort of reflect on where to go to next that you think would be valuable for continuing to support women and parents in particular who work. Yeah.
So I believe the labor law is extremely supportive of women engagement in the workforce beyond the public sector. There's a specific chapter in the labor law dedicated specifically for women. So if a organization employs more than 50 women in a certain location, they are obliged to provide a space with nannies for the female employees to host their children during the working days. It's not an option, it's a mandatory obligation. If even more than that, they are obliged to either coordinate with a daycare or even create a daycare on location for the female employees. I think it's extremely supportive of women's motherhood journey. So you can terminate a female employee while she's pregnant. You can terminate her for a certain period after she gives birth. If she decides to leave during the period after she gives birth, you have to pay her her entire entitlement. It's not treated as a normal resignation. So much specific clauses. For example, for us in our plants, we have shifts. We can't assign a later shift for the female employees. We have to get their specific approval and the ministry's approval. So it's extremely protective of women in the workspace, and I feel extremely enabling to women to participate in the workspace. Now, they can obviously do more, whether it's extended maternity leave, giving fathers the same options available for women. It's not there, but again, the law reflects the culture. It is still on the mother mainly to provide for her children. But for me, where I stand, I feel it's extremely supported, whether it's regulatory or internally in PepsiCo or with the community. We still have a very good community that supports women. I wouldn't have been able to do anything without my mother's support with my kids. So I have to give her a shout out here.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love hearing that. And you're right. I mean, this is an issue that very few countries have figured out how to provide the amount of support that is accurately needed to sustain during these transitional times. So, but I love the socio-cultural aspects that come into play as well to make that possible. I think my last question for you, and we chatted on this a bit before, is just around expatriate women. And I understand as a private sector company, there are still, in addition to the Saudi women that work there, probably a number of women from other countries there as well. And I'm just curious around how some of these recent reforms may impact them or not. And if you could speak to anything in terms of the employability and job mobility for expatriate women who are professionals working there in the kingdom.
So if you're speaking legally, there hasn't been any challenges for expat women to be employed in Saudi. Maybe because of the cultural perceptions, women didn't feel comfortable coming to Saudi as opposed to men. So the men actively seeked employment in Saudi while women didn't. But there wasn't anything legally that stopped any woman from seeking employment in Saudi. It's an equal opportunity for both males and females. And when it comes to working in the private sector, both Saudis and non-Saudis are treated the same when it comes to benefits, when it comes to rights and obligations. Obviously, with certain specification that is up to every organization to implement within their organization, but everyone is treated equally and fairly. So what I wanted to say is that I hope this forum encourages women to explore opportunities, expat women to explore opportunities in Saudi. You've been here for the longest time, as you said, so I hope you talk about your experience here. But when we talk about regulations, rest assured you're protected 100%. You're never gonna be treated unfairly. The labor law is extremely aggressive in protecting employee rights. We've had many instances where I felt us as an organization were treated unfairly because the labor office gave the leverage to the employee as opposed to us as an organization. So please feel safe. feel encouraged to come here and work here. It's a great environment for you to build your career. It's very dynamic now. It's very interesting. There's so much happening here.
Thank you so much, Yara. And I actually think that point is just a great one to build off to as we turn it over to Afnan, who is the Women's Entrepreneurship Department Director over at Manshaat. And I think it's so important to recognize that there are laws and there are regulations, but it's really the understanding of how those laws work and the increased of knowledge and spreading that through types of programmings that I know happen over at Manshaat. And just for the general group who's participating here's background, I just wanted to share a little bit about Manshaat, that it was established in 2016 and it regulates and supports the small, medium enterprise sector in the kingdom. And so I'm sure, Afnan, you'll be able to speak more to that, but would love to just turn it over to you to give some opening remarks and love to ask you a few questions as well. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for all the participants today and the supporter for this program. And I see UBS with you, and UBS one of the main partner with us in chat that we develop a special program to support women to export hair product. And we are happy with this collaboration and also with Atlantic Council and everyone who support this initiative. As you mentioned in Manshaat, we started in 2016. We are an authority under the umbrella of the Ministry of Commerce. Our main focus to increase the participation of the SME in the GDP. And we have focused on supporting women and enable women to develop her existing business or encourage potential entrepreneurs to join this business. So when we go back to 2016, the percentage of women on SME is only less than 21%, whereas today in 2022, we reach, thanks God, 45%. So we are so proud of the achievement we have during the last 5 years, which reflect, as my colleague Mr. Imad mentioned, and my colleague Yara, that there are a lot of changes happening in our regulation and also in our culture to encourage more women to access to the market and to join the workforce. So when our vision stated clearly that we need to increase women in the workforce from 20% to 30%, and what we reach today, the percentage of women participation in workforce is 33% out of the total number. So we see the change, the reflect of the changes happening in different with different activities and programs. We are working on it within the government, the private sector, and also with the non-profit organization. So we apply a main model in empowering women entrepreneurs in Saudi Arabia by looking to the existing women who are in the market, understanding what kind of we understand what kind of challenges they are facing, whether it's in regulation, in accessing to market, or for example to access to finance, and work with main players to help women to access to these support services, or develop some of the regulation with the main stakeholders to increase the number of women who are benefiting from these programs. So there are a lot of areas we are focusing on it to support women. And when we go to the main 6 pillars, we are focusing on it. First, on the culture and mindset. So increase the awareness of women to start a business or to apply technology in her traditional business. Second, to access to support services through our platforms or centers. We have this all over the kingdom. Also, we have the access to finance, and whether it's funding or investment. Also to apply innovation and encourage women to use technology on it. The last thing, which is related to creating a new demand as we talked about daycare. We worked a lot with the Ministry of Human Resource and Social Development to develop different regulations to encourage women to start a business in this field or to be a beneficiary from these services as a worker in the private sector. So all these things we worked on it to support women entrepreneurs.
Thank you. No, that's quite extensive, and I love thinking about that full range of resources that exist there. And as we heard earlier from Imad, the ability for women now to contract or register a business, to open a bank account the same way that men do, that's all possible. And yet, we see in countries where that's been true, still you see typically a smaller percentage of women who do that. Who exercise those rights. And I'm curious if you can speak a little bit to some of those softer skills or types of programming that you've been doing that really help generate that culture of entrepreneurship.
Thank you, Jamie. I want to share that, as you mentioned in Munsha'at, that, or especially in Saudi Arabia, not only in Munsha'at, that we worked hard to develop the regulation, the incentives to support the SME in both gender, not only women.
Exactly.
As an impact, it will be easier for both gender. So when we go to the report, which is done by World Bank, which is called Women and Business and Law, which captures different areas in supporting women globally, not only in Saudi Arabia, this compared with 190 countries all over the world, we reach 100 score out of 100 in supporting entrepreneurs. And also in other areas, not only in entrepreneurship. So when we are talking about, for example, the bay, when we are talking about the workforce, the regulation that my colleague share about it, or when we are talking about mobility, all these things reflect that it's so developing, and there are a lot of changes. And what we are doing in Munsha'at to support women to start her own business or help her to find the best model to register her own business by providing the free consultation service through our SME support center in 4 cities, or if she is not in one of the 4 cities, she can book from an app. We have an application which provide a free mentorship services and consultancy for everyone who want to start or develop his or her own business. And we have a special focus for women to support her through the NGOs that support women or committees that focused on empowering women entrepreneurs. So we as a Munsha'at part of these committees, and we have a strong relationship with them, and we help them to access to our support services we provide to both gender, and make sure that we women are benefiting from these programs and support services, or any incentives in any special sectors, for example, in health sector, retail, etc., that women are benefiting from these services and incentives.
Thank you. No, that's fascinating. And I'm thrilled to hear there's actually apps that you can use to find your networks, and that they could be so customized and really in the fields that you're looking for. So I think that's critical, and it's definitely something that I know, again, the organizers of this are into that connection through the fellowship program and through women in business groups. They create these catalysts for really taking ideas and putting them into place. So that's amazing to hear that's what you've been doing there. We have a little bit more time before opening it up to some of our guests to ask their questions. And so I just wanted to close with one question that any of you can answer. It's always great to hear people's stories and to hear how changes and transformations can affect both personally or others on the job. So opening up the floor to hear something. Yes, Afna. Yeah.
Jamie, I want to welcome all the 30 women who are participating in your network to come to visit us or even call us to support them, because all the ladies apply technology, and maybe most of them, and I know them, I'm really proud of them, and we in Munsha'at are proud of them, and we want you to scale also, because we have a special program to scale your existing businesses. So we are happy to welcome you in Munsha'at or through our centers, whether the CAT Center, SME Support Center, or other services. We can help you to scale through franchise or e-commerce, etc.
Wonderful. No, it's great that you have a captive audience here too. That's exactly the types of folks we're looking for. So thank you. Yara, Ahmed, any thoughts as you've heard this discussion develop, or personal stories you'd like to share? Yeah.
I just want to say, like Afnan said, I'm just extremely proud of everyone. They've caught the ball and they've ran with it. Inshallah, the projects that I've read about the businesses that I've read about are extremely impressive. It's not easy. It's very competitive and challenging, but they're up to it, and I'm extremely proud of them.
Well, no, all I want to add at the end of this first part of the discussion is that it is wonderful to see the change that is happening. I realize that people have done everything that is possible and within our what we see today to change every rule, every regulation there is to allow women to work. But as we progress, as a new reality sets in, we will discover new things, and we will need to change them too as we go. And I think Saudi Arabia should continue to define and find its own path towards achieving the vision that we see in a way that balances our values that are evolving with the modern age towards finding the balance that works for us. And we should definitely learn from our own experiences and our own whatever worked and what didn't in the past, but also look at other countries and see what worked and what didn't in other countries. But what we should not do, of course, is just try to blindly follow what others did, because the way we did our transformation today is very unique to Saudi Arabia. It fits within this, as I said, this comprehensive transformation that is part of a unified, clear vision.
Well said. Thank you. One of the dynamics I love about this panel is that we have representation from the private and public sector, and also just panelists who have had a long career in the private sector and others that are promoting entrepreneurship. On this call, we have with us the WIN Fellows entrepreneurs themselves. And so I want to open the floor up to them to be able to ask any questions. I believe, Rasha, you walked us through what we need to do there, but for those tuning in virtually, you can type your questions into the Zoom Q&A. And for those gathered in Riyadh, if you raise your hand, Jamila will give you the floor to ask your question. But yes, we'd love to hear from entrepreneurs themselves and from some of our guests questions that they have for this panel.
So we have a question over here from the live in Riyadh.
Hey everyone, can you hear me okay? I'm Hannah Remick. I'm head of communications for the American Chamber of Commerce, and I know we're gathered amongst passionate entrepreneurs with us right now. So I was just curious from the panelists if you have any recommendations for perhaps proactive policies or procedures that you think would be helpful as the businesses continue to grow and thrive throughout their growth phases. If there's anything that you think affects women or affects families that you think would be beneficial for them to be proactive.
Was that clear enough for you? No? Okay. Do you mind restating the question, Jamila? A little closer to the mic.
Louder, is that easier? Can you hear me okay now?
A little better. Yeah, it was just echoey.
Okay. Sorry about that. I was just asking if there were any specific policies that entrepreneurs might be interested in proactively looking into that would positively impact females that are, going to be employees for them, or other projects like you had mentioned, having 50 women, then you would provide daycare. So is there anything that you think people should be a little bit more proactive on in implementing?
So I have, I recommend that you visit the policies the programs applied by different government entities. So I know TACAM, which is a semi-public entity under the Ministry of Human Resources, has applied many programs to support women in the workplace. Some of them are to support the commuting to and back from workplace. Some of them are to support childcare, so they would give you a certain percentage of the compensation for childcare. There are HADF programs where they support private sector to promote them employing women at the workplace. There is the Tamhir program. Any fresh graduate, please use the Tamhir program. This is not for entrepreneurs specifically. Use the Tamhir program for your benefit. It's a program supported by HADF under also the Ministry of Human Resources, where they pay for your internship at a private sector entity. It's very commonly used, especially we use it all the time at PepsiCo, and many of our Tamhir interns were eventually employed by us. So make sure to always follow government entities and see what programs are available for you to use.
Afnan, were you gonna?
Yeah, I want to add, after what Yara mentioned, you as an individual, you may be part of the solution. So you as a woman, you find a gap. Maybe you can be the one who go to the ministry or the government and ask them to develop whether an existing programs to support women, or maybe you as a woman who benefit from this program, you face challenges and you want to enhance or develop any condition, or for example, you want different incentives, you can ask for it, or even you can benefit from these two main programs which Yara mentioned. The first one, which is called in Arabic, Qurra, it's an Arabic word, and the other one, which is called Wusul, which related to solve the challenge of mobility for women who want to work to her work. So want to go to her work. So I think today there are a lot of opportunities, and a lot of governments provide a lot of incentives for both gender, and for women also there is these two for now, and they are on the progress of developing another solutions. And there are also a lot of communities and committees that focus on empowering women. So I encourage every woman who want to support in a niche market or in any sector, knock the right door, or knock the right ministry, or for example, maybe she want to have her own initiative or start a social business that solve one of the challenges women are facing, or being part of private sector and work like Yara what mentioned and deal with, and she solves some of the challenges women are facing in the workforce, or helping the decision maker to take the right decision to support women. And the daycare, there is the Ministry for Human Resources and Social Development, and also we in Munsha'at, we work together when we find there is an opportunity for investment opportunity in malls to open a daycare. So what we did, we worked together to attract women who are potential to start a business in daycare. And at the same time, the representative of the Ministry of Human Resources and Social Development bring on the table the 75 malls who are willing to open a daycare. So we give like these incentives, but we want to have more incentives and programs and led by women. So maybe you, as Yara mentioned, go to the incentives which is already there. Try to figure what kind of whether awareness campaign you want to do, or for example, you will be the leader to do it, or help the government entity or the authority or the private sector to develop any programs or incentives to support women in any field.
Thank you, Afnan. It's very helpful. We have a question from Amira Atia. What are the changes or the areas where change is still needed to boost women's workforce participation and the ability to start businesses? And Ahmad, I'd like to turn this over to you to answer first, please.
Well, I think that's a great question, and you know, despite the great progress that has been made, I don't think anybody is under the illusion that the job is done. There is a lot that still needs to be done. On the regulatory side, I think everything that needs to be done for now is done. But where the big change is needed is social, is actually accepting, you know, the social acceptance, whether it's inside the workplace or by the broader societies or by the families. That social change will happen. It will take time. Now, there are ways to help accelerate that acceptance. There are lots of great efforts that we see, you know, by everybody in the government to encourage the new reality, the new norm. But of course, social acceptance will move at different paces, at different speeds, depending on where you are and what sector and what kind of job that you're talking about. This is something that will take time, and a lot of it is also, you know, seeing more and more convincing examples of women leadership at the top. The government has done a great job of promoting some amazing leaders into leadership positions, into ministerial level positions. The private sector still is a little bit behind, in my opinion, on that, but that will catch on. The more women leaders and the role models that we see, the more social acceptance there will be. So that is one thing. And to answer the question on what could be done, it's you know, everything that we can do to show and demonstrate the effectiveness of the workplace where men and women both participate, men and women both lead. And in terms of actually starting business, I think that the successful role models that we see today among some of the young female entrepreneurs that we've seen will pave the way for others to want to follow them. So I think that's where most effort needs to be done. It's on the social acceptance, and that also includes people accepting in the workplace to be managed by, led by female leaders, and that applies both to men and women. I mean, it's not unheard of that a female employee specifically requests not to report to a female boss. That still happens today. So that is part of the social acceptance that needs to happen.
Thank you.
I want to add one more thing, which is today, yes, we reach 45% of the SME owned by women, but what we are looking for, that we want quality businesses owned by women, and these businesses be more scalable by applying new technology or access to different resources that help her to scale and also to hire more women in different fields. So today there are a lot of focus we have in Munsha'at to help women to have a scalable businesses.
Thank you. Yara, I have a question that I'd like to direct to you. It's around the opening of different sectors for women's participation, which previously were closed. What sectors are having the biggest impact in attracting women into the labor force? And then are there actual databases that could be used to track some of these changes? Curious your thoughts, both in PepsiCo and then wider what you're observing.
So don't quote me on numbers, but I've seen it in multiple specialities. I've seen women participation in IT. I've seen women participation in manufacturing. We in PepsiCo have our plant, our Riyadh plant is managed by a female manager, Nof Nuh. So it's opening up, it's changing, but I don't think the change is specific to these past 5 or 6 years. It's been there for a while. It's just that there has been a social, like Imad said, tendency to go to the safer jobs where there was segregation between genders. I graduated in 2010 from university, and I was in the second class of law school. It wasn't there before that point. The first class graduated in 2009. So I'm seeing a lot of female leaders in my field, which makes me extremely proud. Manufacturing is a very, very huge area, and the Ministry of Industry is extremely invested in promoting manufacturing within the for females. We have also PepsiCo sponsors a program with the Ministry of Industry, specifically promoting manufacturing jobs for females. So it's very adverse. Again, if you look at the industries that are opening up, tourism wasn't there until a few years back, and it's also I see a lot of great female leaders in that field as well on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is very entertaining for me because I love seeing success stories. I'm on there almost daily, and whenever I see accomplishments, I feel extremely proud by the precedent that's being set by females in Saudi. So don't quote me on numbers. I don't feel that there's a specific area, but it's almost everywhere.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really interesting, and the observation makes sense too when considering that these are new sectors, and so if there was underemployment for women, then of course they were able to fill that very quickly. So yeah, thank you for sort of shedding light on that, and it'll be interesting to see what happens in the years to come when things are a little more stable there. I have 2 questions now for Yara related to Munsha'at, or Afnan, I'm sorry, with Munsha'at. One is from a woman, Hiba, who is based in DC, and she is curious on how to maximize benefits from Munsha'at as a Saudi woman who's based in DC. And I'll ask the other one too, and just let you take them back to back. The other is from Sandra Medina, who's the founder of Wakayat, which is a housed startup in Saudi Arabia. She's an expat entrepreneur and has said it has been challenging at times to navigate startups because she's not a Saudi. So curious if Munsha'at supports entrepreneurs in Saudi from other nationalities. So sort of similar questions, but on different sides of the ocean here. So yeah, curious your thoughts there, Afnan.
Yeah, for the first question, all our services online, whether from training, but I think there is a challenge when you have a domain outside the country because it's need. We have like the Upshur account, so maybe she knows about it. I prefer that she shared with me her email, or I can give her my email. So we have like a Zoom meeting. I will explain for her about our services. I will help you to connect with the right person in Munsha'at to support you based in your need in your business because as you know there is different support services we have in different sector. So to maximize your benefit, I need to know exactly what kind of needs you have, so I can help you. This is the first one. For the lady who's in KAUST, I would love to connect with her also and help her to benefit from what we are providing in Munshaat, and link her with MISA as a foreign investor if she wants to invest in Saudi Arabia, so she can open or scale her own business in Saudi Arabia, or she is in.
Yes, let me add, I neglected to say one part. The company was created here. So it is a Saudi registered company, but being led by an expat entrepreneur. Mm-hmm.
Great. So happy to connect with the both ladies.
Fantastic, good. And I think through the Atlantic Council, that will be very possible to do. So thank you.
Welcome.
Good. Any more questions from there in Riyadh or from our panelists here? I have one that I often think about when it comes just to entrepreneurship and working in the private sector in general. And this is sort of a global question, but I'm curious, Yara and Afnan, your thoughts on what it looks like when you are a professional and you have your day job, but might be curious to explore entrepreneurship. Any sort of general advice that you give either for going from one side to another, and just given the state of affairs in Saudi Arabia right now, what are some trends you're seeing when it comes to women who want to work and may prefer a more traditional environment of a private sector versus the entrepreneurship space? And I'm sure some of our WIN fellows have thoughts on this too, but would love to hear your thoughts, Afnan and Yara.
So I don't have specific advice, but my umbrella advice is always be proactive, seek opportunities. It's your life, it's your career, it's your dreams. Pursue them aggressively. Don't wait for opportunities to come. No, you have to go there and pursue what you really want. If you feel more, so I think there's a perception that is wrong about the private sector. People, especially traditional people, feel more accommodated in the public sector as to the private sector, which I feel is not true. We respect everyone, from the individual young people entering the market force to the more traditional people. There isn't any, no one is treated differently. If you're more private, you want an entity that respects your privacy as a female. We have that at PepsiCo. Don't make perceptions that might be not true. We enable everyone to perform their job freely and comfortably with respect. So don't make any perceptions. Seek every opportunity out there and see what makes you comfortable in your career. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Nothing is harmful in trying.
Thanks, Yara. Afnan, any thoughts to share on the topic of when women who may be working in the private sector perhaps haven't had previous work experience come to Munshaat and want to start a job for the first time, their own business? What are some ways that you walk them through that? Yeah.
First, for myself, I have 17 years of experience. So in my beginning of my career path, I worked in the private sector. So when Mr. Imad and Yara mentioned about how it's difficult, women working in the workforce, I experienced it. I know it. So I worked in the first, one of the company whose first time in my region, I'm from Eastern Province, so they hire women. So I know the kind of challenges. So then I moved to one of the NGOs that work to empower women. So I have the flavor of women working in the non-profit organization, then in government. So I agree with Yara that about be proactive, and also I believe in be the change you want to. And it's very important for women in the workforce to know exactly that she has a very high responsibility from our leadership, because they believe on us as a woman. That's why we have a lot of support, whether from our manager or from our leadership in our organization, to contribute in our economy. So today it's women role and responsibility to develop any programs, any role she will be leading it, to make it different and to suit our culture, and also help in achieving the goals. So it's very important to know exactly where are the opportunities around me in my sector. So if I'm working in a private sector, and in health, this private sector focus on health, I need to know exactly what's going around me, so I can benefit my personally, I'm benefiting from it and help my organization. So it's very important to go to entrepreneurship and having an entrepreneurial mindset, even in solving any challenges women are facing. So this is what I want to share and validate about what Tiara mentioned, to be proactive and working in the private sector.
Thank you, Afnan, and thank you for taking the time to share some of your personal story as well. Ahmad, I just wanted to give you the chance to give any final thoughts as you think about things from a policy and regulatory perspective, or again, any of your experiences in these spaces before turning it back over to Rasha.
Well, thank you. No, I don't have much to add. Just maybe to highlight once more that the regulations is important, but it's not everything. There's a lot that needs to be done. And I second what Afnan just said about women supporting other women and women supporting themselves, and women realizing that there is a new opportunity that is opening up that did not used to exist, and you know, seizing that opportunity and being confident in themselves, and showing others, leading the way that others can follow later.
Thank you so much. Well, it's been a real joy and delight to be with you guys. And good to see the folks in Riyadh as well. I will turn it back over to Rasha from the Atlantic Council to wrap things up. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. What a fascinating discussion. I personally learned a lot today from discussion about the entrepreneurship ecosystem in Saudi, the impact of policies and regulations in the Saudi market, and how they can affect women entrepreneurs. As we conclude, I'd like to thank our esteemed panelists, Afnan, Imad, and Yara, for the wonderful insights today. And I would like to thank Jamie, of course, for leading and moderating such a wonderful conversation. I'd like to thank our generous sponsors, also U.S. Embassy Riyadh, of course, PepsiCo and UPS, for making the WIN Fellowship and this event possible. We also want to thank our friends at the American Chamber of Commerce in Saudi Arabia, the Women in Business Committee, for hosting today's in-person gathering in Riyadh and for their continuous support. And thank you all very much for joining us today. We hope to see you at our next WIN Fellowship event in December, and wish you all the best. Have a wonderful day. Bye now.
Bye.